It is midday. It is Monday on the Law and Crime Network. Welcome back. I'm Linda Kenney Baden. I will be with you for the next 3 hours. And what a 3 hours we have. Some recapping of what happened and some foreshadowing of what will be. There was also a verdict in the case of Joseph and Jennifer Rosenbaum, who were found guilty of the murder of the killing of the child Layla Marie Daniel. That's their stepdaughter, I should say foster daughter, but not that it matters, and also many abuse counts relating to their other daughter Millie, the 2-year-old and the 4-year-old. Oh my gosh, I just don't even, let's listen to it. So there we have it, victim witness impact statements. These are the victims. Talking through the victim is her adoptive mother for Millie and her biological mother for Layla. Gene Rossi, my guest. I am so thrilled to be here on a Monday, 12 to 3, because I have you, all right? And you and I watched a lot of this trial together. I am still, I mean, when that verdict was read, and I had them all here, it took a long time. There were 49 counts that had to be read. Some of them were guilty and not guilty. The father who got convicted of the second-degree murder, Joseph, what argument would you have made that he wasn't even there when the fatal blow was made to the daughter or the foster daughter?
Well, the facts and testimony supported that he wasn't anywhere to be found. That's number one. And it's pretty clear that he was sort of detached from the core of the criminality. And the third thing is, I know we've sort of pounded this a lot. I am very upset, Linda, very upset that one attorney represented both members of that couple. It just bothers me a lot.
Well, let me ask you this, Gene. Gene, okay, so you are making the examination, or now you're going to make the appeal. Okay, you're going to say he wasn't in his right mind. He was under her spell. He has certain medical conditions, which we'll discuss later. And she told him and she threatened him that she would yell or tell that he was the one who did it if he didn't take the same lawyer. How do you work with that?
Well, I mean, if he threatened her,
and let me just say, I'm not saying that she did. This would be my argument. This would be what I'd be exploring.
Absolutely, that he was coerced in a sense. He didn't have a gun to his head, but he was coerced in a sense to joining that team and having that one attorney. And what really bothers me is, did the judge at any time, and this could be a grounds for appeal, did the judge at any time do a thorough, not a perfunctory, but a thorough hearing to determine whether he knowingly and intelligently waived the right under the Constitution of the United States to have his own attorney, to have an effective attorney? I got to say, there is fertile grounds for appeal for him.
Yeah, but you know what? Then there's the other side, that if he saw that she was abusive and he was even abused by her in some way, in some reverse, odd, strange, demonic way, all right, and he lets the girls stay with her and he doesn't report her, then isn't he also responsible in some way? And that's what the jury may have found. That was the responsibility.
The jury clearly found that. But you know what? They threw about 50 counts at both of them. And I call them spaghetti indictments. You take the bowl, you throw it at the wall, and hope some stick. There was no way a jury was going to run the table and find all of them not guilty on every one of those counts. And here's the other problem with having one attorney for two people is, what if the defendant husband wanted to cooperate and say, you know what? I'm guilty. Maybe I'm guilty of manslaughter, neglect, felony neglect. I'll cooperate. I'll testify against my wife. What if he said that? That attorney is representing two people and wears two hats. That is a conflict extraordinaire.
Well, Gene, we're going to have to wait and see what happens on appeal, I'm sure this is going to go up to the Georgia Supreme Court, but right now we have to take a quick break. Stay with us. I'm Linda Kenney Baden, and we are the Law and Crime Network. Those are the parents of Joseph Rosenbaum. Now, let me bring my other guest in also from Florida, Roger Foley. You and I have talked a number of times. Roger's my boxing champion, my Go Bama champion. But the dad, I know he's hurting, but it's probably not a good idea to blame the biological parents for the death of this kid, is it?
No, Linda, not at all. I mean, he's obviously a distraught dad, and his son is being sentenced. But it's not appropriate to go back and talk about the natural-born child's mother. I mean, it doesn't help. It's not gaining any points with the judge.
Yeah, and let me, Gene Rossi, he did say please and start to really cry. Now, in Jersey where I practice, and also in federal court where you practice, there's a time period where there's a pre-sentence report done, everyone calms down, they can get their statements together and then give their pleas to the court. Why don't other states have that? I find this kind of repulsive, actually.
I think it's money. It's very costly to have a probation officer to do a report. And also, the other thing is, it delays the sentencing. And justice delayed is justice denied. In the federal system, in Virginia, it can take up to 70 days to have a sentencing because you have a probation officer that meets with the defendant. There's a give and take on what goes in the report. They don't do that in the states.
Right, and here, Roger, here we learned that Joseph has cystic fibrosis, and we learned from, because they're one of the advertisers on our network, the foundation, that indeed, you know, in the 1950s, for instance, kids would have died within 2 years, and he probably couldn't have kids, and you kind of choke to death if you have cystic fibrosis. So it's kind of, there's almost like a godly type aura of what happened here, isn't there?
It's just a tough situation all the way around. Obviously, the jury believed the state's evidence and convicted. I mean, there was a lot of evidence, and we talked about this case. Well, I talked to you about it a couple weeks ago, Linda. But it's just a sad state of affairs. And we, as we were talking on break about the fact that the appellate issues about the same attorney representing both the father and the mother, or the step parents in this case, the foster parents.
Terrible situation, and I just point out that one of the things, if you're choking because of the mucus on cystic fibrosis, you have to actually hammer, or not hammer, but really hit hard on the back of the child. So kind of interesting that didn't happen here, or happened in a perverse way in some way. But now let's listen, because the prosecution and the defense got to make their arguments to the judge before sentence. What did they say? Well, you know, that court, Judge Amaro, had a lot to deal with. Roger Foley, you're sitting in Florida. It is a tragedy for both families. People don't understand when there is a crime against someone and your son or daughter commits it and it's been found guilty by a jury, you suffer, but not as much as obviously the dead child. How do you balance this in our courts then?
How do you balance it? It's just an incident that occurs. You can't, a parent can't determine what's going to happen in the future. And right now, you know, there's a period of mourning, mostly for that child. But then there's that sense of, hey, is the system correct? Is the system fair? And that's what I think that the parents are probably going to struggle with. But as you heard, a jury of their peers convicted them. So this is our system, and this is the way it is, and you have to live with it. Now, granted, there may be some appellate issues, and they can look at those things, but from a parent's perspective, like you just said, they love their grandchild, but their son is going to go to prison for life.
So,
what do you do?
So yeah, Joseph actually got 30 years in prison. Jennifer got life in prison. Gene Rossi, was it the fair sentence?
For Joseph, I do. I think 30 years, and I assume that's 30 years without the possibility of parole. But I think the life sentence for her, life without parole, is a perfect sentence. Let her stay in prison for the rest of her life. I got to say, I know that Joseph was convicted. I think if he had his own attorney, I'm going to go back to this. And the other thing that I was thinking about when the attorney for the couple got up there to allocute, you know, this is a high-profile case. A lot of documents, a lot of witnesses. I did a lot of trials. And she didn't have anybody really helping her at counsel's table. And it's a difficult task when you're representing one client, and she was representing two by herself, essentially. I think this has got appeal issues up the wazoo.
Well, let me tell you, the one thing that can't be appealed is the fact that we do have a dead 4-year-old baby, a dead 2-year-old baby, and a 4-year-old who was abused. Whatever happens will happen in the future. We have to take a quick break here at the Law and Crime Network. I'm Linda Kenney Baden. We are For the Record. Stay tuned. I don't know if I would say like punches into the stomach of a child after the medical examiner talked about how the punches may have accounted for this. But Roger Foley, we have a situation where Joseph Rosenbaum, who has cystic fibrosis, would die because his pancreas, talk about issues, and his airways would get clogged of mucus. Now, isn't this sentence then like a life sentence to him? And if I were the defense and you were the defense, wouldn't you use the fact that he had this to say, look, he'd be very aware of somebody choking. He'd never let this happen.
Yeah, of course, it's extremely important. I mean, he has a familiarity with this disease, and part of that disease is the ability to breathe. So considering that the child is having the same sort of situation, why wouldn't that be brought up? And I think Gene Rossi would probably say, probably because this attorney is defending two people and maybe shouldn't have been doing so.
Yeah, and according to Gene Rossi, Curran Mull said, well, this is really a simple case, but you know what? We had a juror who was removed for having contact with the media. Not his fault, but he was removed and put as an alternate, and they had deliberated 16 hours. When the jury comes back and they start anew, they deliberate 14 hours. Now, they're sequestered, and they have a verdict. What does that tell you about jury deliberations and the juror who was let go, so to speak?
Well, I think the jurors should have been let go, but when they had the replacement juror, two things I'd like to know is, was that new juror a little more strident for the prosecution? And number two, what probably happened is when a juror entered the deliberation room, the other 11 jurors would say, hey, we don't need much time here. We're basically voting guilty. You have any questions? You have any thoughts? If not, we're voting guilty. That's probably what happened.
Well, I'd like everyone in our chat room to also think about what may have happened, because when we come back from our break, we're going to play more of Curran Mull's defense closing on behalf of her clients. Stay tuned. So that is Curran Mull, the defense attorney. Gene Rossi, she was talking about Jennifer and the burden of proof. Isn't one of the problems here the severity of this injury with the pancreas being totally dissected in two and the liver also having a gash all the way down? Isn't that the issue, because the pancreas is so deep you don't see it like this unless there's abuse?
Oh, the injuries are completely disproportionate to the alleged act that she did. And she's basically saying, I was following the 911 call, I was trying to do CPR, but the result of what she allegedly did is completely disproportionate. She beat that girl to a pulp. That's all you can conclude. Common sense.
Well, then, of course, Roger Foley, Curran Mull then said, well, it could be some unidentified disease, Dr. Sperry, their forensic pathologist, said, as opposed to Dr. Darashaw for the state. And we've seen cases where there have been wrongful convictions because there was some kind of genetic disease later on, haven't we?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, as a defense counsel, you're looking for those unseen circumstances. And in this case, you know, it's hard. When I first listened to these facts and I heard that the severity of the injury, I said, oh my goodness, how could this happen? How could this happen as she's trying to do the Heimlich maneuver or render some sort of aid? And my gut instinct told me, like, I don't see that happening. Is it possible? It is, but just not very likely. And I think that the degree of the injury was so severe, and then couple that with the other injuries and what she talked about at enrolling the kids in gymnastics, and then the witnesses that said she wasn't enrolled in gymnastics and she didn't take a fall, and they're always supervised, really led you to believe that, hey, there is a course of conduct here that continues to go on, and that's what led to the death of this child.
And the defense could not bring in, despite the fact there is no burden of proof on the defense, they couldn't bring in other indicators or other cases where indeed a pancreas of a child had been dissected through CPR. In fact, they couldn't even bring in an adult, really. But you know what? This case engenders passion, a lot of it. And we saw a lot of it in the opening from the prosecutor, whose name was Daisha Young, and we saw a lot of it in a rebuttal closing, which followed the defense closing. Let's listen to Daisha Young and whether or not she was a prosecutor or whether or not she went over the line. Okay, my panel, that is Daisha Young, and she is bringing it. The question is she bringing it a little too hard? Last week when I was in secretary, I was beating on a doll, but it was just a doll. There's no defendant sitting right next to me, okay? Gene, Rossi, did she go a little bit above the line, or was she just angling on it like a ballerina?
I'm going to give the good and the bad. There are three things about her that's really good, outstanding. A+ is you obviously get the feeling she believes in her case. That's always good. Number two, the passion is off the charts good. Three, and look at her, the belt, the energy. Okay, the one negative, a couple of negatives is in other jurisdictions, you can't say I think or I believe. I know judges that will cut you off and ream you, and there were other parts of her rebuttal that were a little rough, and I would not have done that in a court of law.
Okay, so Roger Foley, she also said, and let me quote it, they making things to conform to the evidence, not making things up, making things to conform to the evidence. Now, you cannot accuse a defense attorney of doing that, can you?
No, absolutely not. Or to have it, or talking about an expert witness and basically just saying that she's a hired gun and say anything, regardless of ethics, to help this individual for a paycheck. It's inappropriate. I've only seen that one time happen in the courtroom, and the judge immediately cut that person off, and there was a sidebar.
Well,
so I agree.
Let me give, before we play the next clip of her, let me give you a little thing. When I was trying the Phil Spector case, and I was in there was a summation. We were in summations. The prosecutor hinted at that. The judge cut right off and actually gave a conforming instruction. That you can't do that, which was unusual because no one liked my client or my defense team. But let's listen to more of Daisha Young. Is she got the passion? Is she bringing it, or is she stepping over that line? Evil, wicked, dishonorable, depraved. Daisha Young is summing up to that jury. Guess what? Stay with us because we're going to have more about this Rosenbaum trial after this break. We are For the Record at the Law&Crime Network.